Welcome to Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio coverage of the Nonprofit Technology Conference, NTC 2015. We're in day 2 today. We're in Austin, Texas at the Convention Center. My guests are Carly Leinheiser and Craig Sinclair. Carly is Associate Attorney for Perlman Perlman in New York City, and Craig Sinclair is Digital Media Manager for the Manhattan Neighborhood Network, MNN. Welcome from New York City, both of you.
Thank you.
And I'm based there as well.
Oh.
Your seminar topic, I love it. Contributing to the Commons, strategies for using open licenses. I say I love it because I think there's a lot of things that people have heard of, but they're not really sure what they mean or what they're doing, or what they ought to be doing.
Right.
Craig, let's start with you. What's the open movement?
The open movement is the idea that everybody knows what they can use and share, basically, I'd say, to digest it simply. That when somebody creates something, they're usually doing it for profit, and it tends to be closed, that you have to buy it, that there's a vendor, that there's a transaction financially involved there. Open movement usually means you can share something clearly with somebody else without having to change hands with money. There may be something else you're exchanging instead, but it's being able to make sure everybody has access to it.
Full access. Carly, anything you want to add to the overview?
Yeah, I think there's also some particular philosophical points that go along with the open source movement specifically, which is sort of the older open movement. One of the ideas with open source software is this idea of software freedom, so that you as the user should have the freedom to look at the software that you're running and understand how it works, and not only do that, but then be able to make modifications to that software, and then you can share those modifications. So you sort of add to the world of free software that's available for everybody. But this focus on the idea that the user should have freedom to look at the tools they're using is important. It's sort of the idea of being able to open the hood of your car and see how it works.
And modification as well.
Right,
Yes.
exactly.
Okay, cool. What's the best way to start? Should we begin by talking about the three Creative Commons, open source, and open data? Is that an okay place to get started? All right.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of the basic idea.
What are these?
Right.
What are Creative Commons, open source, and open data?
Right. So I guess a better way to describe it is there's sort of different categories of works that are subject to copyright in different ways. So you have cultural works, which is what I think people usually think of when they think of copyright. So copyright applies to books, paintings, choreography, sculpture, anything that's a work of authorship that shows originality. So copyright also applies to software in that source code is considered a literary work, essentially, to put it simply. And then you have the idea of data. So databases don't have as much copyright protection as sort of creative cultural works like I was describing.
Okay.
But if you have a sort of original or unique database, there might be some copyright protection there. And then there might also be copyright protection in the contents of the database. So if you have a phone book that's an alphabetical list of names, there's no copyright protection there. But say you have a database of, for example, the Brooklyn Museum is a great example. So they have a database online of all of their works, and you can search by license or by works that are in the public domain. So they have a database that's arranged by type of work and year and creator, and then the contents itself of that database, being paintings and photographs, are also covered by copyright. So then the open licenses are designed to, if you create a database or a piece of software or cultural work, you could apply the appropriate license to make your work open. So that's where Creative Commons licenses apply to cultural works. To put it simply, open source licenses to software, and open data licenses to databases and their contents.
Excellent. Excellent recitation. That's perfect. Thank you. Very concise. Right. Excellent. Craig, what is Manhattan Neighborhood Network's interest in this? And it's the community access.
It's the
television
community access TV for Manhattan.
Okay, excellent.
And we have hundreds of producers who are making shows for us on a regular basis. And while most of it's something they're creating themselves, they may want music to go underneath it. They may want to put an image up on screen. They may want to excerpt someone else's video. Whenever you do that, unless you have a lawyer, you don't necessarily know how legal it is. And fair use in particular, which is often the thing that's cited for reusing something, is open to such vast interpretation that usually the organization gets scared and will say, no, you can't use anything else unless you have explicitly with you the copyright yourself or signed from someone else.
The organization being MNN.
MNN, yes.
All right.
And although we have for on-air broadcast and television, like disclaimers sort of putting it on the producer, that still doesn't help them. The organization may be protected, but we don't want anything to happen to our producers either. So if they're using something that has a Creative Commons license, for instance, which is simply the most common and popular of all the open licenses, I think, they will know exactly what it is they can and can't do with it. Usually we ask them to look for things that are non-commercial anyway, because that's then usually helping out somebody else in that field. But often Creative Commons licenses will ask for attribution and to share alike. So when you're using it, you're also kind of giving back to the community, because you are helping someone else who is a creator that shared something that you're benefiting from, and then you're promoting them in turn by giving them a credit, in our case on the television show. And this is a nice way to kind of maintain the movement and paying it forward while you are producing your own things.
Excellent. So do you find yourself using open source and open data, or not yourselves, but your producers? Are they using those also for?
I'm trying to think of an example
not
of
really
a show.
So much.
The thing is that sometimes we use them all without realizing it. So if you use the internet, the chance is you're using open source on a relatively regular basis. You just don't know, because you may not go and look and see what tools have been used to make the site that you're on. So we, for instance, are using open source as an organization because we use Drupal, a content management system, and Civi CRM to run our website, and also our back-end website, which manages all our producers, schedules all 4 of our television channels, all of our equipment and everything in an incredibly complicated initiative we've been involved with now since 2005 called Community Media Drupal. So we chose that initially because we wanted to recognize as a non-profit that open source was more philosophically aligned with who we were, and we could tweak it and expand it as we needed. And yes, since 2005 it's changed pretty radically, but it's incredibly stable and incredibly robust, and we've been able to do what we've needed to make it available to our staff and producers now.
Right. Civi CRM is here at NTC. Did you stop by?
I have gone
Tell them
spoken to them.
You love their.
There is a lot of it's very rare to go to a place where people discuss their favorite CRM. That certainly happens here.
That's what NTC is for.
Exactly, but no, Civi CRM are fabulous. They are sort of the open source aficionados' open source choice in many ways. They're very.
Is that right? Yeah.
If you go into their convention, then you'll suddenly realize the people there are the ones that make everything, and they're just so friendly and accessible.
All right.
It's
close community.
Yeah, it's really
Civi CRM.
It's a very special place to be a part of.
Cool. All right. Good. Great shout out. Excellent. Carly, let's spend a little time with for both of you, but let's move to Carly. Creative Commons. Now I see Creative Commons on YouTube as an option for what kind of licensing you want your video, and I think that's and as you've both said, it's the most common. What exactly does it mean?
So what does it mean to, like, if you upload a video to YouTube, if you're to apply that license?
To apply Creative Commons to video, yes.
Right. So there's 6 different Creative Commons licenses, and they basically the different licenses have to do with what kind of restrictions you put on somebody's use of your video. So you can, the sort of most basic one is you just ask for attribution back, which means if someone were to take that clip that you uploaded to YouTube and reuse it, they would have to credit you back.
Yeah.
If they make something, there's also share alike, so if they make something new, they would have to put it out under the same license. There are non-commercial and no derivatives restrictions. No derivatives means they can't change it, but they could redistribute it. So if you are uploading a clip to YouTube, there's also an option to choose a license on Flickr and a bunch of other sites. This is sort of getting more common. That means you've sort of tagged your work with this license, and so you're giving permission to anybody who comes across it to use it, as long as they comply with those conditions. You've also made your work searchable by license, which I think is a cool thing that Creative Commons does. So when they talk about their licenses, they say there are 3 layers. There's the legal code. The next layer is the human readable code, because, lawyers obviously were
human readable.
Right. We don't write things for humans to read. And then the 3rd layer is the machine readable code. So your computer the search engines can search for these licenses. And actually, Creative Commons has a search feature. So if you go to search.creativecommons.com, you can put in what you're looking for, and you have an option to search clip art, Flickr, Google image search, all sorts of different sites for works that you can use, and you can put which conditions you want. So if you need something just for like non-commercial purposes, it'll give you those. If you want something you could use for any purpose, it'll give you that. So
All right.
that's how it works.
How about in the implementation of Creative Commons at MNN, Craig? Anything like lessons learned among your hundreds of producers?
The main one is that no one really...
You're the in the field guy.
Yeah,
so
no one really understands what copyright is or how it applies to them. Like, it used to be that you would mail yourself something you'd made, registered post, it seems, and not leave it unopened, and that was the way. But even for us as the broadcaster, with other community media stations, it's unclear whether it's the organization or the producer that actually then owns the copyright. And no one wants to sort of say they do or they don't. Everybody that produces something kind of feels that they own it. So in explaining Creative Commons, it takes a while for people to grasp it, but when they do, they're kind of amazed. The issue tends to be that a lot of people in all spheres feel that when they've made something they're proud of, they deserve to be financially recompensed for it.
Yeah.
And what we've tried to say is one of the things you can benefit from is you will be more likely to have it distributed if you've given it a license to share it, because otherwise no one knows. And if they are, they may be doing it illegally. And all right, well, there are many examples of people illegally showing a thing on television to too many people, or singing a song in a group which are never cracked down on. When someone's made it and puts it out onto the internet in particular, you want them to be able to have it sent on. And I think when we've said, if you use Creative Commons, someone knows what they can do with it, and they also are more likely to know who has created it, that has begun to get traction slowly with the long-term producers.
Okay. Carly, anything more you want to add about Creative Commons before we proceed?
No, I think that probably covers it.
Yeah. Okay. How about open source? Just remind us what open source applies to. What kind of content that is.
So open source applies to software essentially, and there's sort of two different philosophies. So a lot of people refer to it as free and open source software because there's sort of the software freedom side that I talked about earlier, and then there's this idea of open source, which sort of focuses on the collaborative benefits of building software in a collaborative fashion. So the idea is you're going to get better software if the source is open, everyone can look at it, you have more eyes looking for bugs and issues, and then sort of people who start to use it, if you're free to modify it, you can say, oh, there's a feature I want that I don't have, and I can just build that in. And then if you're using a share-alike license, so the most common share-alike license in the open source context is the GPL, the GNU General Public License. So if you're working with software that's licensed under that license, if you make modifications and redistribute them, you have to share it under the same license. So that's how the commons grows in the open source context.
Okay. Craig, in the community, what's
so
open
one
source?
of the things that we do with it is, because I'm not a developer but we're using it, we give back in another way as well. So although I can't contribute code back often, I will find bugs, I will find issues, I'll post about them to highlight them for other people. I'll write documentation, so I've used it, I know how to install it maybe, I know then how to configure it for different needs. That we have an ecosystem of people that they recognize by using it that they're not required to give back, but if they do, it's going to help everybody. And so there's the general, usually kind of for Drupal and CiviCRM, sort of the one, you get a default installation of it, and then you can do whatever you want afterwards, and but you know that you have that strong base to build on, and that is something which you can help then with the extensions that come along with it. We've also, at my last job in Amherst, Massachusetts, a smaller community TV station, didn't have enough money for a networked hard drive for the building, so we used open source for hardware, and we built something for probably a tenth of the market cost, just by having access to local people that wanted. That was what they wanted to play with. They were producers in the sense that they were technologists rather than television makers, and they would not have had this opportunity to use this equipment themselves because they could not afford it. We would have not been able to take advantage of their skills otherwise, and so we created a situation where we got something we needed for much more affordable and actually much more stable than we would have done by going onto the market.
I love the flourishing of the community and
Yeah.
just the sort of equality of it and egalitarian and the contributing. You got me wanting to say contributing. the contributing. You know, I just it's just very inspiring. The movement is the movement is growing, right? It's growing. You're encouraged.
If you look at the places and people who use open source, it's incredible. I mean, the White House website, I think, was the most famous first one to be using Drupal.
Mm-hmm.
But
second, we just learned this on I wish you had said it first, because then I would admonish people. You always should be listening to Nonprofit Radio, because in the last segment we learned that Drupal is the back end of the whitehouse.gov.
Right.
Remarkable.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Okay. So we're encouraged. The movement is flourishing.
Hopefully, yes.
Okay.
I mean, conferences like this, it's an interesting example to see how much open source there is compared to how much sort of vendor options for the same thing. And it tends to be that open source, somebody will just have an idea. They don't have access to other resources, so they look around and see what there is, and then they create maker events and hackathons. People, they will often try and replicate something else they've seen, and in order to do that themselves, these are the tools they found, and other ways they will then make the tools themselves. So it's kind of a nice way to express your creativity in the sandbox where you are allowed to use all the toys and develop new ones that no one's thought of yet.
Love it. Carly, let's talk about open data for databases.
Sure. So I think the open data movement is sort of the newest movement. And so there aren't a ton of different licenses yet. But the basic idea is that open data, again, should be, if you build a database, it should be freely available for anybody else to use, either with attribution or if you make modifications to the database or the contents. There's a share-alike open database license as well that you can use. I think what gets tricky about open data is, first off, understanding what parts of the database are actually subject to copyright and where you need to worry about a license. Because, again, if you're talking about a phone book that's just names alphabetically, there's not really any copyright issues. So, and the other thing is there's this sort of weird concept of database rights, which we don't have in the United States, but exists in the European Union and a few other countries. And the idea there, it's not a copyright, it's a protection in the investment that the database maker put into making the database. And so they get some protection for that time investment.
Okay.
And the idea is where those database rights apply, other people can't use a substantial portion of the database without permission. So Creative Commons and these open database licenses have had to figure out how to sort of waive those rights in addition to any copyrights in the database if you happen to be in a jurisdiction where they apply. So I think that can be a little tricky, especially because if you're just in the United States and those don't apply, you maybe could use the database without a license at all, and you don't want to sort of restrict people unnecessarily if they had the right to use the database in the first place. Makes sense. So I think those are some of the issues with open data. I think I think there's also some interesting things going on in big data generally, where I think people are thinking about how to use large amounts of data and make sure you're using it ethically and that you're not sort of infringing people's privacy and thinking about what you're looking at. So to me, that's some of the more interesting action in data.
Okay, and of course, from the Snowden disclosures,
Exactly.
an enormous topic. Okay, Craig, what are you seeing? How are you using open data?
We're not really using it at the moment. I think
No,
it
you
is
don't
the
have it.
newest thing to
Okay.
come along, but I'm really interested in it because of what people are doing when they you realize how much is being shared that no one's aware of. So most of the times I've come across it, it's been a group like the Sunlight Foundation who make APIs, application programming interfaces for other people to use, and just
Look how
put them out.
generous you are to explain API for listeners who may not know.
I d-
Because see, on Nonprofit Radio we have jargon jail.
Yeah.
You just
Jargon
you
jail.
you avoided it completely.
Thank you.
Probation not even. Parole not even required because you weren't sentenced.
It's one of the
So
ones I think I have to
Yeah.
say myself to remind myself. If you
yeah.
ask me what actually that means in a more detailed technical way, we'll reach a threshold pretty quickly.
Okay,
But
you're a gracious guy.
They have for like looking at sort of federal, state, and local data means that you can use those for your organization and begin to filter it. So you can find out about things like voting records or use of resources. And then the other one would be transit. Often, I just wrote a piece about Baltimore had said that it was going to cost $6 million to do some project and take years. It took one guy a weekend to work it out. He contacted his friends who then built something in the next couple of days just for fun and for free to show it could be done. So if there is data, it's sort of knowing, yes, how open it actually is, whether you're allowed to access it. And I think you're right, with Snowden revelations, people are more cautious about this. They don't want to trespass against it. But that when you realize that you can, if you have access to it, find out this other information and use it to help people out, that it's a very compelling topic, which I think next year at this conference is going to be, a much bigger deal.
More on open data to come. Okay, well, we'll be at NTC 16. I think they'll have us back. All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much. Carly Leinheiser, Associate Attorney, Perlman Perlman, and Craig Sinclair, Digital Media Manager at Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Carly and Craig, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony.
Thanks for sharing. And sharing openly, but we won't make any modifications. Tony Martignetti, nonprofit radio coverage of NTC, the Nonprofit Technology Conference. Thanks so much for being with us.